Hello viewers, Super GT here. Welcome to How to Improve on Gran Turismo Sport. The game's of course been out for a long time now, so you might think this is quite a late guide, but a lot of people have been asking me for guides or a guide and just general advice on how to improve. So here it is. There's so many things to talk about, so many possible things you can do to improve your ability on this game, your results, your speed. So I'm going to try to touch upon as many as I can, but I won't be able to go into everything in depth. If there is anything more you would like to know, then please do comment. And if you are yourself a fully fledged pro who knows a lot about the game, then please do comment down below if you have any further tips to add on to what I'm saying here. So to begin with, we'll start off with things you probably should be doing before you even step into a race, just like basic settings and things like that. With the assists, I'm using counter steer off, ASM off, ABS default, and then the driving line and the brake marker off, so I turn those off. So those are the basic settings. Counter steer and ASM are just going to hinder you and slow you down overall. So these are the kind of things you kind of want to break free from. So typically assists, they are going to help you, but they will slow you down as soon as you start to get quicker. I would just recommend turning them off. ABS default. Now there is one assist you probably might want to use, which I actually quite recommend. I used to use it when I first played the game, and it's actually very useful. And plenty of people still use it now because it's a very useful assist. That's the cone marker assist, which helps you with braking consistency. We'll talk more about this later. So going into corners, you really want to get your brake markers down and start braking consistently at the same place. So the cone marker assist can really help. So with the two cones, where the two cones are, that's where you ideally need to be braking. And most of the time it's pretty much dead right. It's not always absolutely correct, but you can use it as a reference. It's just another reference you can use. We'll talk about braking references later. But the cone marker is just another help that you can use to improve your braking consistency. And once you get braking consistency, that's really going to help the rest of the corner. And another thing is manual gears. If you're on automatic, you're at a massive disadvantage. You just really have to get onto manual. I'd recommend just spending a session, just pick a car, doesn't really matter which one, and go to any track, preferably just on your own. You just do as many laps as you like, and just learn to shift pretty much, let's just say when the rev gauge just reaches the end of the limiter, before it starts bouncing off, of course, and just really get into your head the idea the rev gauge goes up and then you shift up, and just of course map your buttons to something quite easy. I used to use circle to go up a gear and square to go down, but if you have a wheel then you can quite easily use your paddles or your shifter. But manual, you have to 100% be on that. If you're not on it, then you just don't really stand a chance. Now there's two main things to really do before you step into a race. Number one is watch replays. So before I step into the qualifying session or a race, I go onto the top 10 leaderboard and I watch some of the top replays and just see what they're doing and see if you can replicate that yourself. So the things you're going to be looking out for in a replay is the car that they're using, where they're braking, which gears they're using through the corners, and where they're shifting the car. So some cars react better if you short shift them or shift them at a certain point. So you just kind of learn those things. So there's lots of things you can learn from just one replay. Maybe ideally watch a couple of replays, because sometimes some people drive in a weird way, which is really hard to kind of replicate. If you watch a couple of replays, then you should be fine, and just try to replicate what they're doing. And then the other thing you should really do before you step into a race is qualifying. Do a lot of qualifying. I think a lot of people spend maybe just 2-3 laps doing qualifying and just leave it at that, and they're kind of happy with it. But I think you really need to be spending at least 20-30 minutes on a qualifying session just to really get that qualifying time down. Because of course not only are you going to start in a better position in the race, which is really going to help, especially in the shorter races where, you know, race B is only 8 minutes long normally, so you're not really going to be able to do too much overtaking. So you're going to start in a better position, but also it really helps with just your overall consistency of the track. If you can just go around consistently without making mistakes, even if you're not the quickest, even if you can just go around consistently without making mistakes at a solid pace, then that's really going to help you out in the race. Because if you can have a race which is mistake free and consistent, you're going to beat a lot of people, because a lot of people do make mistakes. They're not consistent, they go off the track, they get a penalty because they don't know where the limit is. And if you are the one who's consistent, you're going to be beating a lot of people. So the typical race approach I have, now there's a lot of you probably just want to jump into a race and just have fun, and then it doesn't matter where you finish. That's absolutely fine. But if you want to improve your results and get faster, then it's a very, very good idea to kind of change your mentality and your approach. So the main thing, qualify well, of course, and then just be really clinical and mistake-free and consistent during the race. You're trying to just churn out as fast and consistent laps as you possibly can without doing anything stupid, getting a silly penalty which you shouldn't have got because you went wide or something, or you hit someone. You're just trying to minimize those silly things that you can do, and I still do them, but you're just trying to get those out of your game as much as possible. And qualifying, again, really helps with that. Qualifying is basically like what training is to a sports person. You know, you can't just turn up to the games and expect to do well all the time. You have to do the training behind the scenes, and that's really going to help your results. Okay, so in terms of during the race, braking points, this is really important. Now, again, you can use the cone marker assist, but if you're not going to use that, or even if you are going to use that, you're still going to have to learn some braking points and references. So most corners, or a lot of corners, will have the 100, the 150, so the brake boards going into the turn. And a lot of the time you can just brake right next to one of them. So going into a corner, I'll brake right next to the 100 board. And if I do that every lap, then I'll be fine. So a lot of the time it's quite easy. You just match yourself up. As soon as I get next to that board, I'll brake. Not every corner has a board or a series of boards. Sometimes it might be when I touch that curb or get next to that curb or that piece of tarmac which goes over to the left, or this advertising board which is right there. Just anything like that. You're just trying to find something next to the track or on the track even. When your car is next to it, then you can brake, and that should set you into the corner. So once you work out exactly where that braking point is, you can just consistently hit that braking point every time you go around the race, and you'll be able to just, again, have a consistent mistake-free race. So track limits, this is so important. Now you have to understand that not all of the track limits are kind of consistent. So there's lots of examples where you can really kind of, it looks like you're just abusing the track. So for example, Senna S, through the right hand section you can go 2 wheels on the curb, 2 on the AstroTurf. It looks absolutely ridiculous, but that is the quickest way through the corner. That is what the track limit is, and that's what all the best players will be doing. And if you don't do it, then you're just going to get left behind. There's another example, Nürburgring Grand Prix circuit, through the chicane, 2 wheels on the curb, 2 wheels on the AstroTurf, and again, that's the track limit, and you kind of just have to assimilate yourself to that. And if you're not going to be doing it, then you're just going to get left behind. So track limits, really important. Most of the time it's just keep 2 wheels within the white lines, but there's lots of occasions where the penalty system is kind of a bit off, and you can kind of just go a little bit further than you might think. Slipstreaming, this is another really important factor in the game. Slipstream is like, it feels overpowered to be honest, but it's so important. If you're roughly 3/4 of a second behind someone, in group 3 I think, but it's a little bit different depending on the speed of the cars. But in group 3, for example, if you're 3/4 of a second behind someone, you're going to be gaining time through slipstreams. So you need to make sure that on a straight you are directly behind the person in front, and you're going to get sort of pulled along by them, and you're going to gain time. So of course, depending on how long a straight is, you could sometimes catch completely up with the car ahead and just overtake them because of how powerful and how strong the slipstream is. So you have to absolutely make sure that you're getting every inch of slipstream that you can. If a car tries to move away, you follow them. So when you come onto a straight, just be ready. The car in front might not want you to have their slipstream. They're going to move. Just be ready and react to the idea that they might try to move across and escape, or make you escape their slipstream. So think of it as every car has this sort of slipstream range behind them that you kind of want to get into to get pulled along and gain a couple of tenths per lap. And at the same time, you've got one that you don't want people to be in your slipstream, so you need to try to pull away and get out of that range so you're not helping other people. Slipstream is really important. You can gain, depends on the track of course, but you can gain more than half a second, or sometimes more than a second on a lap, because of how powerful it is. Next up, half throttling through turns. This is something that I've noticed a lot of top guys doing. So half throttling, okay, so through the turn, this is mainly on really slow corners or tight corners. They're going to be on half throttle, and then as they go out of the turn, they're back onto full throttle. So half throttling, it keeps the car settled. You're going faster than you would if you weren't throttling at all. And then on the exit of the turn, because you're already halfway on the throttle, you're quicker to full throttle. So there's lots of advantages of keeping half throttle through a corner. Just experiment with it, especially through slow corners. Keep it on half throttle through the turn, and then on the exit of the turn, then accelerate fully. There's often a lot of time to be gained from just keeping the throttle at the right amount through the corner, and a lot of time half throttle. More than half and the car tends to understeer out, and less than half and you're not going as quick as you could be. So half tends to be the right amount through a lot of mid corners, and then before of course you get to full throttle. And then the next point, which is I think the really important point in this game, which really differentiates good players from great players, which is getting on the throttle early. This is something that is so hard to get dead right every time, but I think the people who can get on the throttle the earliest tend to be the quickest. So the main reason why is because if you get on the throttle earlier than someone else through the corner, you're already accelerating up to speed, and then through the next straight after the corner, you're already at a higher speed. So through the entire next straight, you'll gain and you'll gain and you're gaining. So not only do you gain through the corner, you gain on the next straight as well. So sometimes, obviously it depends on the track, but you can gain a couple of attempts just by getting on the throttle a tiny bit earlier than someone else. There's so much time to be gained, you really do need to focus coming out of a turn, getting on that throttle as early as you can. The main difficulty is the car might slide out, and the best way to kind of counteract that is obviously to counter steer, but also to kind of straighten up the car before you accelerate. So this is something I was doing when I was on the controller. The instant before I was accelerating fully, I was just straightening up the car, so I wasn't turning so much. So the main reason why a car is going to slide is because you're going slow around a slow corner, you're turning tight, so you've got more steering angle, and then you're on full throttle. That's when a car is going to slide. So you want to minimise your turning angle. So instead of turning tight, you bring the steering more to a straight angle. It doesn't have to be completely straight, but straighter, and then you can get on the throttle a lot earlier. So this isn't really a problem through fast corners. So through fast sweeping corners, something like Kyoto, we've got a lot of really fast sweeping corners. You're not going to have a problem with the car spinning out. It's coming out of the slow corners or the medium speed corners. That's where you often have the problems with the car oversteering. So in that final phase of the corner, just before you accelerate, straighten up the car a tiny bit and then accelerate, and the car should be more stable. And next point is smoothness. Being just smooth as possible. I think smoothness is really rewarded on this game. Now there are some cars like the Audi R8, which we've seen recently, where you kind of had to slide it a little bit to really get the maximum out of it. But in general, being smooth is really going to help you, and that means on the steering and on the throttle mainly. So if you're sliding all over the place, you're probably overdriving and probably trying too hard. You might need to just scale back what you're doing. And you have to listen as well. So if you can hear the tyres screeching a lot, you're probably going into a corner too fast, or you're probably accelerating too early out of the corner. So you really have to listen to the tyres, and that really gives you a good understanding of whether or not you're pushing too much. Next up is looking at the right things at the right time. There's a really busy HUD in Gran Turismo Sport. There's so much information, sometimes too much information. It's very easy to get distracted. And going back to the point earlier about not making mistakes, this is something you want to absolutely minimise, is doing silly mistakes, getting silly penalties because you were distracted. The time deltas on the left hand side of the screen, very interesting to look at to know exactly where the cars are behind you or in front of you, but just make sure that through a corner you're not looking at that. You're not looking at the wrong thing at the wrong time. Now if I'm in a lot of space, so if I'm looking at the time gaps on the left side of the screen and the car in front is 2 seconds ahead and the car behind is 2 seconds behind, then I don't really need to focus on the other cars because I'm in quite a big gap there. So I can just really focus on my braking points and just lapping as quickly as possible. It's when a car gets a lot closer, then okay, you do need to focus a little bit on the other cars. But when you are on your own, then just forget about the other cars and just wait for the straights to look at the time delta again. And that kind of brings me on to a point of overall awareness. So just knowing where other cars are. There's lots of different ways. So you can look at the map just to see where other cars are. You can look at the radar, so turn the radar on so you can see where cars are next to you or behind you, and look at the time gaps on the left hand side of the screen. If they're over a second behind, they're quite close, but they're probably not within overtaking range, so you don't really have to worry about them. If they're 2 or more seconds behind, then just forget about them completely. Just overall awareness of where other cars are, and then thinking about the right thing at the right time and not making silly mistakes or being inconsistent because you're not focusing on the right thing. Traction control. So I use 0 traction control on pretty much everything, and a lot of people have trouble with going from 2 or 1 TCS down to 0. So the main thing we kind of mentioned earlier, is with regard to getting on the throttle as early as you can and doing it in a straighter line. So the more you're turning, the slower you're going, the more likely the car is to spin out. The main thing to think about is just how early you're getting on that throttle and which angle the car is at. So if you're having trouble with traction control, just be really progressive on the throttle. We spoke about the half throttling thing earlier. So just be half throttle through the turn and then gradually feed it through to 100%. Ideally, when you're not still turning at a sharp angle. That's the worst thing you can do. Wait for the car to straighten up and then accelerate fully. And then as you get more and more brave, you're about to get on the throttle a little bit earlier and a little bit earlier and a little bit earlier as you learn to control the car. So other really important factors during a race, fuel saving. So fuel saving, there's 3 main ways to do it. Number 1, short shifting. So you shift earlier than you probably would do. That saves quite a lot of fuel. It's probably the most common way to save fuel. Lift and coast. Now this one I don't do too much, but it's a good way of doing it. So going into a very fast corner with a big braking zone, you just lift off the throttle for maybe half a second and then brake. Also you have the lean mix. So of course you've got the settings 1 to 6. So 1 being the most powerful but using the most fuel, and then 6 being less power but less fuel being used. I think the main 2 ways to use that is to, at the end of a long straight, put it down to 6. So you're not losing much speed because you're already at max speed, so you don't have to worry about that. And then put it back down to 1 as soon as you go into the corner. And then the second way is through twisty sections on a circuit, so particularly very twisty tracks. Put it up to 2 or 3. So you're not going to lose too much time because you don't need the power because you're going through a twisty section and you're saving fuel at the same time. So those are the main ways of fuel saving. Fuel saving is really important because in the pit stop, if you've saved fuel compared to someone else, if you save more fuel than them, you're just going to save so much more time. There's a lot of time to be gained in the pit stop by having more fuel than someone else. There is a balance to strike though, of course. So of course you don't want to just save tons of fuel and then go really slow at the same time. So don't just put it in 6 and then save loads of fuel. So you do need to still go as fast as possible while saving the fuel. And sometimes it's a good idea to stay in the slipstream of the car ahead and save fuel that way. So the slipstream is so strong that you can just stay in the slipstream, save fuel that way, and then you probably would have saved more fuel than the car ahead because you've got the slipstream. You've got the benefit of the slipstream, they haven't. Driving on worn tyres, again, so this is similar to the fuel saving aspect. So in race C and FIA races, you're going to have to deal with fuel, you're going to have to deal with tyre wear. And driving on worn tyres, so what are the things you have to do? You have to brake earlier, you have to turn in a tiny bit earlier, and you have to accelerate a little bit more smoothly on the way out of the turn. So you just need to make sure you're braking a tiny bit earlier every lap, turning in a tiny bit earlier, and just being a little bit more smooth as the race goes on. That covers the basic sort of physics and things to do during a race. There's other things you can do, of course. So for example, use the best car. It's kind of an obvious one. So go to the leaderboard, what are people using? Or during a race, this guy won with this car and he just smashed everyone. What car do they use? Using the best car is one of the easiest tickets to getting good results. It's kind of a cheap thing, I suppose you could say, but most people tend to go with the same car in a lot of races, and often going in something else is just suicide. So sticking with the best car is often the best way to get a good result. Just remember, of course, though, that the best qualifying car isn't always the best race car. So some cars are really good in qualifying because you don't have to worry about tyre and fuel use in qualifying, but in a race you might have to. In race C you do, in FIA races you do. So there is a difference between qualifying and race sometimes, and you do have to take that into consideration. Another thing is just improving your driver rating. So by getting better results, so by qualifying better and then making less mistakes and finishing higher up, you're going to improve your driver rating, and then you're going to race against better people, which will make you even better because you're racing against better people. This is such a good thing to do, race against better people. You just get better by doing that. So you can get a downward spiral in the game by crashing, getting penalties, your rating goes down, it descends into chaos and hell, and your experience is really bad. Conversely, you can have a really good experience, be clinical, make no mistakes, qualify really well, have good results, and you're going to go up and up and up, and you're going to get better and better by doing that. Another thing you can do is watch strategy guides on YouTube. If I had to narrow it down to 3 people, I'll say David Perrell, Key25 and Tidgney. I'll link them all in the description. But these 3 guys, and others of course, they often do guides on the upcoming races. So the best car to use and where to brake, and they're going to explain what they're doing. So it's a really good tool to use. It's a bit like watching a replay, I suppose. You can kind of see what a top driver is doing, why they're doing it, what they're thinking, and it's just a great tool to use to improve your knowledge going into a race. So you just know where to brake, you know which car to use, you know what strategy to use, you know where you should short shift, you know where to pit, you know which tyre to use. There's so many factors in a race, and a lot of it is just using the right thing at the right time and not getting left behind by the people who know more than you do. So a lot of the time it's not just down to your just raw talent, a lot of it's just down to your knowledge and using the right settings, using the right car, using the right tyres, using the right strategy. So there's a lot of depth to Gran Turismo, more than you might give it credit for. So there's lots of things to think about. So it's a knowledge war a lot of the time. So knowing the right things, it will get you a lot of better results. And my final point is get a wheel. Now, I went from a controller to a wheel, and my ability, it just has improved so quickly. Because on a wheel it's so much easier to be smooth on the throttle, to be progressive on the steering, to be smooth on the steering, and to fuel save, and your tyre wear is a lot better as well. I did a comparison between the controller and the wheel. The tyre wear is horrible on a controller. It's just so much worse. There's almost nothing you can do to match a wheel user. So there's a massive advantage to be had with using a wheel. Now, of course, it can be expensive. You don't have to fork out £1,000 on a direct drive wheel. There are cheaper options like Logitech do very good wheels for good prices. I've gone mid-range. I went for the CSL Elite by FANATEC. You've also got Thrustmaster TGT, which is a very good wheel. Even a cheaper Logitech wheel is a good option, and it will improve your game overall. If you're serious about improving on the game and getting good, then it might be a solid option just to get yourself a wheel. So that pretty much covers it after quite a lot of talking, quite a lot of points. Now the best thing to do, I think, is just to really just focus probably on one thing at a time and just work on that, because as soon as you start trying to do too many things at the same time, it's just going to become really hard for you. So again, if you need any more help, then please do ask in the comments. If there's anything else that I've missed or you would like to expand upon, then please do comment as well. You know, in the comments I want to see extra help with people who have got further tips on how to improve. But that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you find this video useful in any way. If you do find it useful, hit the like button, and if you're not already, then maybe consider subscribing for more of the same. But that's it from me. Thank you so much for the support, everyone. Thank you everyone on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, wherever it might be that you follow me, and Patreon as well, of course, and during all of my live streams. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.